Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast. I'm your host, Josh Schachnow, Canadian immigration lawyer and CEO over here at Visto.ai. Very happy to be joined today by a good friend, Justin Foote. Justin, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Very excited to jump in. We're going to talk about some interesting topics. I think Justin has a good perspective on some things related to LMIAs, temporary foreign workers, immigrant-friendly jobs that we see filled a lot in Canada these days, immigration scams, the state of consultants and immigration lawyers in Canada. Some interesting topics there as well. Justin, just to kind of jump off before we get into those topics, can you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and what you're working on?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. I've been a Canadian immigration or regulated Canadian immigration consultant for about almost 4 years now. I just registered. I worked under a senior RCIC for a total of about 8 or 9 years experience now. Man, does time ever fly? And I was part of a bigger immigration firm for about 5 years. And just 2 years ago, I started my own firm called Just Right Immigration, where I specialize mostly in helping employers in Canada get clearance to hire their foreign workers and then helping those foreign workers get their permanent residence. I also dabble a bit in teaching as well. So I mentor and teach young lawyers and RCICs essentially how to do immigration properly and to do their jobs. And I've taught across the country. I've done national conferences. I'm very close with our national educator, CIPP. So yeah, I got lots going on. That's what I do with my time.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think it lends an interesting perspective when you're a practitioner as well as kind of a teacher, mentor, advisor at the same time. So I think it'll lend itself well to what we're going to talk about today. Let's talk about your kind of specialty first. So LMIAs, work permits. Can you number one maybe give a brief explanation? Maybe we have some listeners who are not practitioners. What is an LMIA? What is the temporary foreign worker program, and what's the kind of the state of the union there right now? It's, 30th of January. This will probably go live, mid-late February. But the state of the union, shall we say, in early 2024.
Sure. So I guess to start, just a high level overview of what it is, and LMIAs stand for Labor Market Impact Assessments. And to essentially summarize it, there's a lot more detail there, but the program, the program is called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And the part of it is the LMIAs, the Labor Market Impact Assessments. And essentially what it does is it is a program that employers use to get clearance from the federal government, essentially to hire temporary foreign workers. The idea is that the federal government wants to determine first if there's actually a Canadian or a permanent resident that can fill that position first. If they can, they obviously want to give it to the Canadian or permanent resident first, Canada first, and all of that. If you can prove that the position can't be filled by a Canadian or permanent resident, then you get something called a positive LMIA, which is essentially your ticket to say, hey, you can hire a temporary foreign worker. So that's generally what an LMIA is. And it is very, very highly coveted by immigrants because that is your job offer, essentially. So you notice a lot of immigrants will come say, I need a job offer. I need a job offer. Most of the time, what they're talking about is an LMIA supported job offer. Okay. So that's kind of what it is. Now, the state of where LMIAs are at and kind of the state of the union right now, not much has changed, I would say, so much recently with it, aside from the processing times. So if you're an employer and you're looking to get an LMIA, just know right now they are absolutely bogged down. We're looking at processing times now that are double, if not triple, what is expected. So I don't know what it is right now, but we're looking at something like 40, 50 business days or something for a single LMIA. And to give you an idea of how ridiculous that is, it's usually like 20. So
Right.
something's going on with
So
it.
what's 20? So that's what, like maybe 4, 5, 6 months we're talking?
Yeah, something like that, right? Normally I would tell my clients that, you're looking at 3 months or 3 or 4 months until you get your approval. Now I'm telling clients, it's like, hey, it's more like could be 6 to 8, right? Until you get
Right.
thing together because you got that advertising period. And then you also got to wait for your worker's work permit too. So you got that timing before your worker's on the ground. So it's kind of the state of the union right now. Do I see any major changes coming along for the temporary foreign worker program? Possibly, but as we've seen before, especially with the student program, surprises are abound, my friend.
That's certainly true, and we've had some really good episodes about the study permit, recent news and changes. So probably we'll leave that for another conversation. But so, can you talk a little bit about processing times are one thing, a very important thing, right? And as you said, it might take 4, 5, 6 months to process the LMIA. That doesn't count the 30 days of recruitment that you might have to do. For most LMIAs, you have to do 30 days of recruitment first before you can even apply. And then if your worker isn't visa exempt and maybe wants to apply at the border, they still have to submit the work permit application, right? So I think one of the big problems here, Justin, is it's so hard and timely for employers to get LMIAs that most just aren't even bothering with it. Can you talk a little bit about how difficult is it, right? Ignoring the timelines, right? Is this a difficult, quote unquote, process for Canadian employers to go through, would you say?
So that's a fantastic question, Josh. Short answer, yes. Long answer, it's more difficult than it has to be, in my opinion, in my professional opinion. We you have to understand when it comes to IRCC, they're not really big into listening to, they say they listen to stakeholders. I'm not so sure about that. Talk is cheap though. And I think that the amount of information that's out there and how transparent ESDC is, Employment and Social Development Canada is, people who run the temporary foreign worker program, for those who don't know, they're not as clear with instructions as they should be. To the point where I think a lot of the staff, even at ESDC, are not on the same page with things. A good example is sometimes you'll have to call ESDC to see how one of your applications are doing. And you call one person, you get one answer. You call another person, you get a totally different answer. It's a little scary. So I think that there's this huge barrier that's put up to employers for a process that's not really, shouldn't really be that daunting, but because the information is so, if it's out there, it's mixed up and really poorly delivered, if it's out there at all. So a lot of the time when I
Right.
approach employers and I tell them that the temporary foreign worker program and LMIAs is actually a thing, they look at me and they go, "Oh yeah, we know that's a thing, but it takes like 10 years and costs $15,000 and it has like a 2% chance of succeeding." And you go, "Whoa, not at all. It's not like that." And so it could just go to show what kind of information is out there for Canadian employers and how to access this program, how to utilize this program. When 90% of my time is not really selling them on the program itself, but mostly educating them that it exists and it's a thing that you can actually use. And yes, it does work and it doesn't cost $1 million and it doesn't take 10 years. And they go,
Right.
"Really?" So
From
I
their
think that's a big problem.
perspective though, Justin, like,
Yeah.
isn't it like it's like all like in their defense, isn't it almost one and the same if it's going to take a year versus 10? Like if I'm an employer and you're a smart, experienced immigration professional, you come to me and say, "Josh, hey, temporary foreign worker program, pretty cool. You're struggling to hire people. This program could help. Okay, great. Justin, when can I have the employee here?" Probably 10 to 12 months, right? And you're like, "Okay, well, screw that," right? Pardon my French. I might as well just tough it out. And okay, maybe it'll take me 5 months to hire a Canadian, but that's shorter than 10, right? So, not to say that I disagree with what you're saying, which is I agree. Most Canadian employers either don't know about the program, and that's why we have this podcast, right? Is to share this information, and whether there be, maybe there's some Canadian employers listening out there. Maybe there's some potential employees out there that are trying to better their knowledge about the LMIA program so they can try to convince their employers to sponsor them. But I think one of the big problems is, as you said, the program has been made so complicated and such a long processing time that it might as well be 10 years because employers are like, well, it's not even worth it, right? At that period of time. So, what do you, well, let me ask you this. What do employers tell you when you go to correct them and you say, no, 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 it's not 10 years, but it is like 6 to 12 months? What do they say to that?
Exactly what you're thinking. Oh my gosh, that's way too long. Exactly what you said. And that is a major issue. And you really have to, when it comes to that, though, the way that you have to kind of pitch it to employers is that at least you're getting an employee here for, 2 to 3 years on that work permit, and they're locked in with you. They can't work for anybody else. And I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, so this is your double-edged sword, Josh. We live in a time where we have millennials who are working. By the way, I'm a millennial. I can say that, where you have people that are the turnover is so high for people who are in, those frontline jobs. We're talking like, your servers, your cashiers, those, let's call them front end jobs. And they turn over so quickly that, sometimes you're talking to an employer that's tried to fill this position over a dozen times, and it's been like an
Right.
entire year. So when you tell them and you say, hey, it's going to be 6 to 8 months, they go, oh my God, yeah, that's way too long. But, you know, it's better than the alternative than the revolving door I have now. So
That's a good point.
yeah, a lot of them see the value there when you tell them that you got someone that's going to be there for 2 or 3 years and that you can rely on them and they have something more to that they're fighting for. And your job, keeping their job with you is tied into that. And that's, of course, greater, more immigration to Canada, whether that's PR for their family or just for themselves. There's something greater on the line. And that
Right.
really speaks to employers. And that's very, very valuable. So that's kind of what bridges the gap between the whole, oh my gosh, it's 6 to 8 months until the person starts working here, versus like, hey, when they do get here, I'm going to have a great worker.
Right.
So it's about then.
Yeah. That's a great way to kind of reframe, and maybe the immigration professionals that are listening to this episode can take that in mind, because I'm sure many immigration professionals struggle to quote unquote sell LMIAs to employers due to the processing times, and that's kind of a great way to reframe. Just to take a step back for those who, again, may not be well versed, the temporary foreign worker program leads to a closed work permit. So as Justin said, the worker's coming on a 2 to 3 year closed work permit, which means they can only work for the employer that is listed on that LMIA, unless, like, to switch jobs is a bit of a pain, right? You'd have to get re-sponsored by a new company. So there's kind of that baked in loyalty where they're likely going to stay with your company for at least a couple of years, maybe longer. And hopefully it's a good relationship, right? And it extends beyond that, even into PR. What I wanted to ask, Justin, is what do you see right now in terms of what are LMIAs being used for a lot of these days, and or any other kind of like quote unquote immigrant friendly roles that, are very popular?
Sure. So one of the ones that I've been doing a lot of is, of course, long haul truck drivers. We have a big issue with long haul truck drivers in this country, all across the country. It's not just limited to one area. So we were having a huge influx of LMIAs for long haul truck drivers and experienced long haul truck drivers. So that's a big one. Of course, the frontline jobs that I had spoken about just a little while ago are also very big. You're talking about your serving jobs, your cashier jobs, basic sales jobs, but then you're also talking supervisory roles. So a very popular one. I don't know if this is ever going to change. I've been doing this for 8 years, and this is still a popular position for skilled immigrants. It is the food service supervisor. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. If I have any practitioners in the crowd. We've all probably done an LMIA. Even if you don't do LMIAs, you've probably done an LMIA for a food service supervisor. You just don't know yet. Very common role. Manufacturing as well. I've seen a lot of want for LMIAs and utilization of the temporary foreign worker program for manufacturing outside of the major cities. So I'm here in Manitoba. I know, Josh, you're in Ontario, but here in Manitoba, we have a few towns and around the capital city, Winnipeg, where there are general labor jobs that are available. And it's great because not only is it hard for employers to get people to get out of the main cities or the major cities, so that provides them something, but it also allows the temporary foreign worker that's working that job to get extra points because it's a rural type of job. And that's something for a greater conversation. And so that's what I'm seeing. Very much baseline jobs, long haul truck drivers, food service supervisors, food counter attendants. And also, I predict that we're going to have a lot of tradespeople coming in. Specifically in Manitoba, I can say HVAC workers are going to be really big. I think plumbers are going to be big. And I think we're going to be really hurting for welders as well. Keep in mind, if any of your viewers here are skilled in those and have experience in those, you should be looking into immigrating to Canada soon, because you can sign up for your apprenticeship here in Canada and you can get completely licensed. You can become an apprentice, you can become a journeyman, and we need you here. So those are some of the
Yeah. Yeah.
positions I would say are really, really needed and staffed by immigrants and future immigrants, I think. The trade for sure.
That's a great answer and very helpful. And I think it's safe to say more than Manitoba needs a lot of tradespeople. I mean, Ontario, I think everywhere. I think across Canada, probably in other countries too, but definitely across Canada. If you're already in or interested in the trades, I think it would be a great idea, not just because of the demand, but that demand has spawned trades draws for express entry. It's spawned trades PNP programs, right? In a lot of the major provinces. So they're creating specific pathways to make it easier for those folks to, settle and get their PR, which I think is a good decision. Great. Well, Justin, this has been super helpful in terms of learning more about the LMIA side and the worker side. I'd love to switch gears here to talk a little bit more about the work that you do, teaching, advising, all that kind of stuff, because I think it's pretty unique. Not often we have guests on with that perspective and that experience. Can you talk a little bit, again, just 30,000-foot view? What is it that you do? Is it coaching? Is it like virtual classes? What does that exactly entail?
Sure. So I have multiple offerings. I'll do conferences. So I speak at conferences. I'll do trainings through the RCIC's National Educator CIPP. I will do like little podcast recordings. I'll do things like this. I also do one-on-one private coaching as well for RCICs that want to kind of have a mentor in place for their first couple of applications. So that's kind of definitely a 30,000-foot view of what I do.
Awesome. So if anybody is interested in any of that stuff, make sure to reach out. We will have descriptions to Justin's stuff in the description, and we'll mention it at the end. What are you seeing right now too, Justin, in the sense of ghost consultants, right? Obviously a big problem, a lot of fraud, a lot of scamming in this industry inside and outside Canada. What are you seeing there? What are your thoughts about that? And what can we do to kind of combat it? Maybe that's part two of the question that we can get into, but wanted to get your thoughts there as well.
Sure. So ghost consultants are still a problem, just the same type of problem they've always been, right? And I think there's a lot of allure there for prospective immigrants because first off, the price may be cheaper, so it's alluring. And, people don't really know, the immigration system can be complicated. So they're looking for someone that can help them out for the right price. So these ghost consultants will say all the right things. The only problem is that, if you actually get to a point where you submit your application, they disappear, right? Do I think that they're on the rise or anything like that? That's very hard to say. Do I think that and by we, I mean, I guess law societies and also CICC, which is our regulator, are they doing enough about it? I don't think they are. I think that there could be a lot more awareness about it. But that's why we do things like this, Josh. That's why we talk about it on your excellent podcast here. So we raise awareness. I think that talking about it and warning people and kind of giving them some tips and pointers on how to detect these ghost consultants is the first step to that. I just wish our regulators would get on board and really start pushing that message because I think there's a lot of that could do a lot of help.
I agree. I mean, not only does it help the prospective immigrant, but it helps the bar, the lawyers and the consultants as well, right?
Right.
If we make sure that people are using proper professionals. Just to throw some quick definitions in, a ghost consultant is basically someone who pretends to be an immigration consultant, right? So in order to sell services, in order to sell Canadian immigration services, you must either be a Canadian immigration consultant licensed by the RCC, what is it? ICCRC?
It's the CICC now, or the college.
CICC, right. The Canadian Immigration College of Consultants, I
College of
think.
Immigration and Canadian and Citizenship Consultants.
Okay, so the CICC, right? They're a consultant regulated by the CICC, or they're an immigration lawyer where they'd be regulated by their respective provincial bar. So, for example, the Law Society of Ontario, the Law Society of BC, et cetera, whichever province that the lawyer is based out of or licensed in. I think some provinces allow like I think in Quebec, notaries or paralegals and stuff can also practice immigration. But anyways, those are kind of the big ones to keep an eye out for. And for those that are especially abroad, just keep in mind, if you're talking to somebody who's trying to sell your services and they're not one of those two or maybe three or four things, they're probably working illegally. Justin, do you have any tips on how prospective immigrants can, like, what are some key signs that they can look for or do or avoid? Because like you said, most of these ghost consultants are abroad, right? They can go shake hands with people in their home countries. They give them cheap price quotes that are certainly cheaper than what Canadian immigration professionals are charging, partially due to cost of living, partially due to actually, some of us are pretty good at what we do. But anyways, any tips on what people can do or not do or look to avoid specifically?
For sure. So the first and number one tip that I like to give everybody about this topic is that educate yourself. That's the first thing that you can do. Go on Canada.ca, start reading some articles, start getting some definitions to things. For instance, what is implied status? Figure out what that is. Formally or maintained status, right? Figure out what that is. Then when you talk to this quote unquote potential consultants, start asking them some of these questions and then listen to their responses. I'll tell you right now that some of these ghost consultants have no idea what these things are. Okay. Just the basic definitions too. It's quite funny. I've actually had the unfortunate encounter with a couple of them. And you ask them these very, very basic questions. You watch them squirm right away and they don't have a direct answer for you. Huge, huge red light. And not only will that help you against ghost consultants, that'll also help you against consultants that don't know what they're talking about, but they talk a good game, which is another thing I'd like to talk to you about eventually, Josh. Is
maybe we'll get into that next. I think it is a great point. Not only will it flesh out the illegal actors, but there are probably plenty of legal actors that are just not very good at what they do. So yeah, so I'd never even thought of that. I mean, getting educated for sure. My thought was, well, go read on the Canada.ca website. What's a consultant? What's a lawyer? Learn the basics. But I think that's a great suggestion. Learn a couple immigration terms and use them to kind of help quiz these prospective, professionals, quote unquote.
Yeah, Josh, honestly, like if you look at it, look, if you can read stuff off Canada.ca, write down a few notes and get a few definitions, and then you ask them that and they can't recite it off the top of their head. I mean, even if they are regulated Canadian immigration consultants or lawyers, don't give them your money. You just did better than them by reading Canada.ca. Why would you give them your money? That's scary.
That's a great point. Anything else that you'd recommend? Like, for example, one thing I always recommend is by all means, please look them up so if they claim to be a consultant, look them up on the CICC website. All you have to do is Google CICC, make sure it's the college website, and they have an entire registry of every Canadian immigration consultant. And you can type in the name and you can see if they're there and in good standing. Same thing with the law societies. You can Google my name followed by Law Society of Ontario and see my profile and see that it says in good standing. So I think that should be I like your suggestion as well. But in terms of once once somebody's actually talking to you and trying to convince you or persuade you to kind of use their services, look them up, make sure they actually are, regulated. Anything else that you recommend, Justin? Because I've even seen, like, I've heard horror stories of like people making fake social media profiles, pretending to be regulated professionals, all that kind of stuff. And any other tips or ways that they can avoid or detect shady players?
Of course. So I've actually heard the same thing, and I've had that. Well, I've had the misfortune, I guess, of and I've had a client who had a problem with a ghost consultant, and they had asked for an R number, and they did get an R number. Problem was that was an R number from someone else. That wasn't the actual
Mhm.
person they were talking to. So even if you're asking them for a registration number or you're looking them up on the site, sometimes they'll even go beyond that. So you have to be so careful. They'll just use someone else's R number. I even had someone try to claim that they worked at my firm. Like I've had that on LinkedIn, if you can believe it, right? And they
Jeez.
go, "Oh, look, that's the way to, I'm a consultant, right?" So I really have to hammer on doing your own research. That's really the best way to figure out whether or not this person is a consultant or not. Another thing that you want to look for is their contracts. That's a big deal. Like, is there a written contract or is it a handshake deal? Or is it just, did you say okay over an email? I'm telling you right now, guys,
Mhm.
listen to me. Saying okay over an email is not a good contract. You're spending
Right.
thousands of dollars. You're doing a potentially life changing thing. Get a written contract. If they say, oh, we don't need a
Well,
contract, we're good. Yeah.
also, Justin, the like at least with the law societies, they have standard template retainers that were basically required. You don't have to use the standard template, but it's basically like, hey, you need a retainer, aka a contract, with all your clients. And I think the college has something similar, right? Where they're like, hey, here's a standard template retainer with the common clauses that are important for you to have. So if you have a professional trying to take your money and you haven't signed anything with them, that's a huge red flag. And like Justin said, take a close look at any agreement they send to you. If it doesn't look professional, if it has a weird business name or no business name, if it doesn't mention the individual that's going to be representing you, yeah, that's a huge red flag, and that's great advice.
Yeah, guys, we live in a highly regulated industry here. Josh is a lawyer, myself as a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. Okay. There are checks and balances. There are codes of conduct. If it doesn't feel like those things are backing some of the stuff that the person you're talking to is doing, that's a huge red flag right away. It should be professional. It should be structured. It should feel like you're working with a professional, not someone who's kind of just winging it as they go. Really listen to your instincts on that, guys. When I talk to people who have been scammed by ghost consultants, they always tell me they look back on it and they go, "Oh my gosh, Justin, it was so obvious." And it, you know, it kind of is, but you just got to be on the lookout for it.
Yeah. Yeah, great advice. Use your gut instinct. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Just to kind of summarize before we move on, number one, do your homework, as Justin said, right? Learn a little bit about immigration, not necessarily because you're going to do the whole thing yourself, but so you can quiz some people and see if they're actually as smart as they seem. Number two, make sure they're registered. Look them up on the respective websites, depending on who their regulator is. Number three, evaluate the relationship. Does it feel professional? Is there a good retainer being sent your way? Does the contract make sense? And as Justin was saying, does it feel like a genuine professional relationship? And if not, you probably want to be careful before you send any of these people your money. So I think this is really good, Justin. I do hope that, a topic like this will help educate some people on what to look out for and maybe to share with family, friends, all that kind of stuff if they do have people that are considering coming to Canada. Now, earlier you also mentioned that there are regulated professionals that you might want to be careful with as well. Can you talk a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yes. So you have to be careful with regulated Canadian immigration consultants because of the state the industry is in here in Canada. Just speaking for regulated Canadian immigration consultants. I'm not speaking for lawyers. Josh may be able to speak more on that in a bit. But you're dealing with now an industry where there's an influx of new RCICs. And by new, I mean under 2 years experience. Okay. Or you have very, very old 30 plus, 20 plus year practicing immigration consultants. So on one end, you got the new consultants that don't have a lot of experience, but are just kind of thrown into the industry and are like, all right, you're an immigration consultant, off you go. Right. And they're still kind of learning. And then on the other hand, you got the really, really, seasoned veteran people. But unfortunately, the way that the system is built for RCICs, at least, there's not a lot of push, even though we have to do updated education every month and all of that. There's not a real push to keep your skills current. So you run the risk of, a guy saying that, yeah, I've been practicing for 25 years, but the last, 10 years, they haven't really been in it. They haven't been, keeping up to date, but they say all the right things and they know all the right words to say. So we're kind of caught in that place right now where we got the younger consultants that are replacing the older consultants. And on both ends, you have things you have to look out for when you're deciding who to represent you with your immigration applications. And from what I see, there's a huge need right now for people who know what they're doing or have experience as RCICs to teach this new generation. That's where I kind of jump in. And a lot of these new RCICs, they mean well. Don't get me wrong. Like they want it. They're out to save the world, and they're most of them are immigrants themselves, right? They want to do well. The thing is that they're just thrown into a system where it's not as good as it should be when it comes to education before they get that license, right? And then there's that, there's no outlet. There's no real outlet to get that real world experience. You know how you do like an internship or you do like a co-op program there's nothing like that for consultants. So there's a huge need for someone to step in there and start teaching these consultants or giving them that experience. So what I'm trying to say to kind of summarize is that you got to be careful on both ends now. So, it's not good enough to say now that, oh, this guy, he looks like he's, 60 plus years old and he says he's been in the industry for 25 years. Doesn't matter, guys. Look at me. Does not matter. Do your research. Ask him the same questions. Does not matter. Same with a person who's been practicing, looks young, been practicing for 2 years. Start asking those questions too, because you might be dealing with someone who's out of date, but has practiced for 20 years, or you're going to deal with someone who is less than 2 years experience and may not know exactly what they're doing.
Right. Do you think that the college is graduating too many consultants on a yearly basis, number one? And number two, what do you think they could do to improve their training so that when these new consultants, like you said, many of whom have great intentions, but how can we set more of them up for success?
So you have to understand that what had happened is we were previously, as you mentioned a while back in this podcast, that we used to be ICCRC. Okay. And
we meaning the college, like the regulator.
Correct.
Right.
It used to be ICCRC. We swapped over to a new regulator called CICC, the one we use now. But part of that transition was a changing of the requirements to become an RCIC. One of them being you can't go to certain colleges anymore. You have to go to a very specific university. It got more expensive. You had to have like at least a bachelor's degree. I'm not sure exactly the requirements, but the requirements went up significantly. And they had announced this. And so what happened was everyone said, oh my gosh, the requirements are going up. It's going to cost me way more money to go to school for this. I need to get my license now before they change over to CICC. So you had this huge influx of consultants. And we're talking, Josh, we're talking from 6,000 consultants across Canada to more than 8,500 consultants, okay, in 1 year jump.
Right.
just
Jeez. And now
insane.
there's even more. Yeah,
And
I
there's
mean,
even more.
I think at last check, right now there's somewhere between like 11 and 12,000 consultants.
You're right.
Which it almost just in my opinion, like it almost brings similar thoughts to, this is going to sound weird at first, but run with me for a second here. The problem with international students, which is they just open the floodgates for too long. I don't think it's as bad. Like, I think international students was literally the Wild West for 8 years, and I'm happy that they did something about it. But the problem with the consultants seems to be, number one, they've had to reform the regulator like 3 times in the last 10, 15 years. So something's, I don't know, I'm not a consultant, I don't see what happens at the ground level, but there's something wrong at the regulator level when you have to end and reform your regulator 3 times in like the span of 15 years. And number two, when the volume gets to be so big, it's just hard to regulate, right? Like when there were 3, 4, 5,000 consultants, it was probably a good, I would argue, probably higher quality on average, right? Don't get me wrong. I know plenty of amazing consultants. I'm not saying don't use consultants at all. But when that number, like you said, kind of now at this point, if it used to be 6,000, like, 10, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years ago, now you're looking at 12. You've doubled the bar in less than 10 years. What's the regulator even supposed to do? How are they going to regulate that many people, right? So I don't know. Does that kind of does that make sense what I'm saying? And do you agree? Do you disagree? Where do you think that they go from here?
It makes sense. And I agree with you as much as, they are my regulators. I do have to I stand behind them to a certain extent, but I do agree with you. Okay. There are a lot of things that CICC could be doing way better. And I completely agree with you when they opened the floodgates, especially when they were doing the changeover from what they were before to CICC. They just let it go. I'm telling you, like my graduating class, when I graduated and got my license, okay, usually you're sitting with about 19 others. So it's a class of 20 immigration consultants. Josh, my graduating class was 350 people. I'm not kidding.
Mm-hmm.
They
Just
didn't
at
even know
your one class in your one school.
one
Right.
class and one test taking. So we take an entrance to practice exam. Passing that, there were 350 people sitting taking that test. And
Right.
300 or 300,
Pretty
sorry,
high pass rate?
350 passed that test. More were even sitting.
Okay. Right. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you was, and maybe we can, I don't want to compare per se one against the other, right? Like lawyers versus consultants. They can both, with the exception of a few things like going to court and stuff like that, they can both largely do a lot of the same stuff. But almost just to kind of put in perspective, maybe how the college could better train. Like, can you break down, okay, today I'm Josh. I'm a 33-year-old living in Toronto. I have a bachelor's degree. I want to be an RCIC. What do I have to do? How long is the program? How many tests are there? How long does it take?
It sounds like you're asking me to calculate your express entry points, Josh.
But just broadly speaking, right?
No,
Like, is it 2-year program and one exam and then you're good? Like what, like very
so
high level?
yeah. Okay. So what I think that they should be doing. So what ended up happening. Okay. So this was the process that I had to go through. It's changed now. I'm not 100% familiar with exactly what the process is now, but what I had to go through was 1 year of college. I went to Herzing College. It was an online course, 1 year course, pass that, and then
Full
go
time
take
or like part time?
full time, full time.
Okay.
Yep. And then pass the course and then take the test and off you go. Okay. So a couple issues. First off, I definitely think CICC should be stepping in and should be regulating this a lot better than they are. They should be ensuring the quality. Now, don't get me wrong. I've heard the quality of education has gone up since we switched to the university. I can't remember what the name escapes me. The university in Ontario.
Queens now, I think, right?
Queens. That's correct.
Yeah.
You're correct. Right.
Yeah.
And the quality of education has gone up. So I can't speak to that. But I know that the quality of education that was being offered at these colleges across the country was absolutely horrendous. no one had looked at these courses. No one had updated them for years. And what had happened is it got to a point where, and this is just my personal opinion, I don't know, but from what I experienced, it got to the point where it was like, hey, these are the 5 colleges that offer this course that allows you to become an immigration consultant. And they know it. So they just do whatever they want. It's like, you
Right.
can't go anywhere else. Where else are you going to go? Right. So I think the first step to making things better is having a strong education, a strong curriculum that goes through all of the things and not just digs into the IRPA or the IRPR, which by the way is the laws that regulate what we do, guys. Just you may not be familiar. Not looking just into the laws, but also looking into exactly what it means to practice and what it means to on the day to day. And then also I think one of the most important components that they could be putting into this is that a mandatory sort of mentoring or like an internship or a co-op program before
Right.
you're allowed to practice or write the exam to actually get your license, something like that, so that you get some industry experience. Because I'm telling you guys, just like any job, right? Um, what happens in college is very different in the real world. And I'm sure we can all speak to that no matter what your industry is. But it's so important that the RCICs, especially the new ones, are getting that actual experience, but are being guided by someone who has that experience to teach them how to do it in the real world. And I think that piece is missing right now. I think that's the biggest piece. If you wanted to improve it like massively, add a mentoring or a co-op or an internship component as a mandatory requirement for new RCICs. I think that would do wonders for
I
the
mean,
economy.
it makes sense. It's effectively what you're saying is let's have some practical work experience, some real life, work experience or advice or guidance. I think it makes complete sense. I think I'm not 100% sure. I think they've extended the program like now instead of a 1 year basically what you were saying is a 1 year college program and then pass a test and then you're good to go. I think now they might have upped it to 2 years. I don't remember, but then I think it's still just write a test, pass the test, and you're ready to go. And just as a quick comparison, again, I'm not trying to compare one to another, but maybe to provide some guidance on how some improvements can be made, which is going to relate to your comment in just a second. Like to become a lawyer, not an immigration lawyer per se, any type of lawyer in Canada, it's a 4-year bachelor's degree. Then you got to write the LSAT, get into law school, 3 years of law school, right? So 3 years of post grad. Then the rest is a little bit different by province, but in Ontario you have to article for 10 months. Articling is basically work at a law firm, right? Work as a I think it has to be paid intern at a law firm, get real life work experience. Then you write the bar exam, which was a total pain in the ass. But anyways, that's a little bit off topic here because it covers a wide variety, right? But what I will say is it's certainly that those basically 4 years, right? 3 years in law school, 10 months articling, 2 months studying for the bar, covers research, writing, learning, different areas of the law, the practice of the law, business law, all that kind of stuff. And I think on average, because I talk to a lot of lawyers and I talk to a lot of consultants, and I would say on average, there's also a volume thing, which I'll bring up in just a second, is it makes for just a more well-rounded, on average, practitioner. I've still spoken to crap lawyers, and I've spoken to amazing consultants, right? We're just talking kind of generally speaking. The other thing, too, is by my math, there's somewhere like 3,000 to 4,000 immigration lawyers in Canada. And as we said, there's something like 12,000 immigration consultants, right? Which group is going to be easier to regulate, right? But anyways, I don't know, man. I just hope some of this conversation sparks some thinking and some ideating. And I mean, some people say maybe the two should somehow work together, right? Maybe it would qualify if the consultants go do an articling position at a law firm, right?
I
That could
love
be
that
kind of
idea.
cool.
Josh, I love that idea. As soon as you said that lawyer article, it's like, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Josh. That's what we need. Some sort of an articling program, just like lawyers have. It would make all the difference, I swear. All the difference
Right.
I see, right?
Now, another difference, Justin, I note is on average, consultants I find tend to be far more entrepreneurial, meaning a large percentage of them go out on their own right away. Which, listen, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm pro capitalism, all that kind of stuff. That's great, especially because you can kind of like build your own pathway. But as you said, it can also be a little bit concerning if you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 new professionals within the last year or two, and they're starting a business and they may not have any real world experience doing any of that work. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a solution to that. I don't think you should stop that. I don't think you should ever like not allow that to happen. But how can we get more of them some real world education and or a mentor and or advisor, whereas a lot of the lawyers there's plenty of lawyers that have their own law firms, but they tend to be, you know, I think there's like fewer solo practitioner lawyers than there are consultants, in my opinion.
And I would have to agree with you as well. And I can only talk from the consultant side. Okay. So I'll give you the consultant side of it. Yeah. A lot of us are really quickly going to sole practitioner. It's very, very rare that we'll go work with a bigger firm or something like that. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, when it comes to people who are becoming consultants right now, a lot of us are immigrants, right? Or were former immigrants, right? They got their PR, they become Canadian citizens. So they've been through the process. And those are the types of people that are coming over and they are becoming RCICs. And they're thinking to themselves, look, I come from my home country. I did it. I know a couple people from that country and I have people on the ground there. Therefore, I have an advantage. So I should be able to start my business and run my own firm. And so they do. And they're right. They do have that advantage for a little while. And then their friend gets their immigration done and they do a great job. And then their other friend gets their immigration done and they do a great job. And then they run out of friends. And they're like, okay, where's the business coming from now? Hey, I talked to my mom and dad. I immigrated my uncle. I immigrated my friends. Where's the business coming from? And that's where most
Hmm.
RCICs stall out. That's where it's like, okay, I've
Interesting.
used all of my connections. Now I need to figure out how to hit the pavement, the digital pavement in this case, and knock on some digital doors, to put it bluntly. And they don't know how to do that. And so what they end up doing is they end up holding full-time jobs and they end up doing immigration consulting as a side hustle. Now, I don't have the actual numbers and I haven't run the statistic, but based on my experience, so this is all subjective, keep in mind, but I would be comfortable in saying that half of those consultants are running their firms as essentially side hustles, right? Or just side
Hmm.
gigs. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. It's just that it just goes to show you that the hardest thing for immigration consultants, and like I said, I can't speak for lawyers, but immigration consultants is getting that consistent work and figuring out after they've exhausted their friends and family, what do they do to get their name out there? And for a lot of them, the answer is, I don't know, which once again goes more to my point, why we need mentors to help
Right.
support them. And so that's what's happening in the industry right now. I'd say comfortably half of those people, of the 12,000 you said, are in Canada. They're doing this part time, and
Interesting.
I think that that speaks more to where the industry is going to be going. Not to get too off on a tangent here, but I think that the bigger players in the immigration industry in the coming years are going to be those people that are going to be able to rally those who are using this as side hustles right now together with the promise of consistent work and unite them under one banner. The person that's
Hmm.
able to control essentially the sales funnel and is able to find that answer is going to be the next big player. It's going to be the next Cohen, for instance, right? Guys
Interesting.
are not familiar. That's Canada Visa. They're basically the biggest, if not the biggest immigration firm in Canada. Very, very well known. But that's going to be the key. That's going to be the key. Someone's going to have to reach out to these RCICs that are doing it part time and say, "Hey, I'll offer you a contract. What do you like to do? You like to do work permits? Perfect. That's your specialization now. I will find you a bunch of people that need work permits. I'll give you the work. You do the work." And that's what's going to happen. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it happen already. Some of the bigger players that are up
Interesting.
and coming, that's what they're doing. So that's what it's going to be all about. That's just my prediction, though. We'll see. It's the
It
wild,
makes
wild
sense.
west.
I mean, the last thing I was going to mention too, and kind of ask you about, is I think the industry is going to look a little different over the next few years because, again, I'm gonna draw parallels to the international student space. Immigration has had a great couple decades in Canada, maybe longer, like forever. Immigration's been great in Canada. What
Oh, yeah.
just happened last month? They decided to put a cap on international students. And for the first time in I don't know how long, they've announced that they're going to hold the PR number, I think for next year, is going to be flat, right?
Yep.
So
Insane.
what does this mean, right? And why have there been so many consultants? Well, there's been a lot of business to go around, right? When millions of applications, like people tend to take the number they see in the news, oh, 500,000 new immigrants to Canada. That's just permanent residents, right? Canada has been bringing in hundreds of thousands of temporary foreign workers, hundreds of thousands of international students, millions of visitors. So we're probably talking, by super rough napkin math, 4, 5, 6, 7 million applications submitted per year, and that number's been going up, right, every year. For the first time in a long time, that number's not going to go up, right? Study permits are going to be cut by 35%, roughly. PR is going to start a freeze next year. So what's going to happen, right? Some firms might find it, especially the ones that are finding it tough already, might be tougher than ever, right? To find new business. So I agree with what you're saying too, which is interesting, which is maybe we see some amalgamation in the Canadian immigration industry. More practitioners, it seems like this would be interesting. I don't know if like the college has data on like what percentage of practitioners are practicing by themselves, right? Or run their own firm as opposed to like being an employee. I wonder if they have that data. I don't know. But maybe we see that number drastically come down. Like you said, an amalgamation, bigger players pop up, they start vacuuming up smaller players, which doesn't sound like a terrible thing to me. I don't know. Is that a good or a bad thing? What do you think?
Well, I think it can. This is the best on the fence answer ever, but I think it's both. I have to do it to you guys. I'm sorry. I think it's a little bit of both because I think that you're going to get some people that are going to be, let's call it disingenuous about the process. And it's going to be, conveyor belt, application conveyor belt. Okay. Where quality is secondary to how quickly we can process as many
But that's
applicants.
already
Oh,
what the big firms are, right, Justin? Like you walk into the
true.
top 10 law firms in Canada by volume,
Mhm.
and they're basically visa factories, right? It's all clerks and admin staff pumping out thousands of applications, right?
Sure. And I
I
mean, yeah,
think.
you get that from that. And of course, haven't, I, I don't have that type of experience, but I would believe what you're saying, Josh, that is probably the case. What I think that you're going to have people that are going to get away from is they're going to be less of a personal touch. So you're going to have a representative, but you may never ever see them. Like,
Hmm.
how we're having a podcast right now, we're talking face to face. This is not going to happen. It's just going to be like, hey, Joe Smith, and there's his R number, right? Just know that he's got an R number, he's registered, he's a guy on your application, but you'll never see him and your application submitted. On the good side, though, let's end on a positive note. I think it's going to give an opportunity for a lot of talented young RCICs to get out there and do what they're so damn good at. I think it's going to give the opportunity for those that really do want to make a difference. And I see it in my mentees all the time. They want to make a difference. They're not out there for the money. They're out there because they've been through the process. They know what it's like and they just want to help. They want to make it a better system for everybody. And I think that by the industry going that direction, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for those individuals as well to jump on and show the world essentially how good they are at this and giving them the opportunity to grow and maybe even start their own firms eventually. Right. So there's good and bad. There's good and bad. I like to
Yeah.
lean more on the side of good because I think there's a lot of good practitioners out there that just don't have the work coming in for them to produce and show how good they are at it. It's a little bad, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of last thought to end on a good note. And by all means, Justin and I do, while this episode may have been a little bit critical in certain areas, certainly trying to be productive, right? And hoping that ideas and suggestions made here might be able to spark more interesting discussion and create improvements, because Canadian immigration is special, and like you said, most of the practitioners that I know are in it for the right reasons. They want to help people. We want to continue to grow this country. We want to fill labor shortages, all that good stuff. Anyways, Justin, it's been great having you on the podcast. If anybody is interested in getting in touch, maybe learning about your firm or your services, where do you recommend that they go?
You can, if you're interested in possibly booking a consultation, thinking of immigrating to Canada as an individual or your family, you can go to my website, justrightImmigration.com. You can fill out a free online assessment, and that'll get to me. We can talk. Or if you're if you're an employer in Canada that's looking for some answers on the LMIA program, temporary foreign worker program, you can reach out to me, info@justrightImmigration.com. Or you can message me on LinkedIn. I also do mentoring services for younger RCICs and immigration lawyers. So if you're interested in that, best way is to email me, info@justrightImmigration.com, or message me on LinkedIn. I'm always active on LinkedIn, so you can hit me up there.
Awesome. And we will have links to the three of those in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast platform of your choice. Justin, thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Josh. It's been a great time.